this concourse and indeterminate aspects of them are you don't exactly know what's going to happen because of the variables that you bring to the table as the observer and the things that can change in terms of the event themselves. And they're always able to be brand new. So every day going to work, even though it's the same, it's a new event. You can't put your foot in the stream twice, you can't put your foot in the same place in a stream twice, or that kind of saying that's as old as time. That's what it's referring to essentially, is that you can't put your foot in the stream because it's not the same time. Let's say if you're using time as your metric in terms of your measurement system, or if you're using the water that's passing by or whatever you may be using, it isn't the same stream when you put your foot back in. The implication: there is no predetermined set of covert or private facts to be uncovered. Therefore, nothing is there to predict. There is no cause, and therefore you don't have to invoke necessarily effect. Okay? So we create something to predict. So we are artificially making a world of science to be pragmatic, hopefully, and that's what most people's goals are, I think. So it's not a problem to do that. It's just good to know what you're doing. So that's what this background, I think, is really what's maybe separates what a PhD in the field of psychology studies and comes to understand, as opposed to master's level folks typically that are geared towards applied settings, because it's not necessarily important for everybody to deal with these issues, but they are extremely important to how we do things in our world, let's just say, in our practical world. Like incentive systems, for example, pay for performance is something we're going to talk about, and some of these basic assumptions are important to understand when you're going to talk about how you would do a pay for performance system effectively, because we all know what pay for performance means in nomenclature. It's to get paid to go to your job. So you're supposed to work and you get paid for that performance, okay? But it's not really a performance like getting up and doing a play, but it really is in terms of, you can decide what the play is, so you need to do that, and you can make a good play or a bad play, and that's what pay for performance is about in a behavioral way, in a scientific way. And so, again, hopefully you'll see how these things will wrap together here. And I'll try to speed up because I know I'm running out of time. Okay. Specificity. Outcomes are specific to an entire set of particular measurement operations and reveal nothing outside these events. No ultimate truth contacted. So this relates to the stuff we're going to hear about in terms of G theory. So I try to remember this aspect of specificity, and all the universe of events is what I'll talk about in terms of G theory. And it's used for educational assessments to try to assess the universe of psychology. If you're going to make a graduation exam, or the GRE, that's subject specific, uses generalizability theory. And G is the statistical. G is like R. Basically, G is used in, I believe it's Spielman's research. So we'll get to that in a bit. So again, the knowing and the known are double-headed arrows. They impact each other, and it's not knowing and some ultimate knowledge. There is no ultimate knowledge to be known in this type of a scientific system. There's no absolute correct outcome. So in Q methodology, there's no right way to sort these things. You guys can't be wrong the way you sorted those things. You may think that I think you are, because I might not exactly sort them the same way, but I don't feel that way. So you're very welcome to have your own opinion about what psychology should be. And I don't want to change that necessarily. That's not my role. I feel like my role here is to help you better understand exactly what you are in terms of psychologist, how that may impact your clinical practice, and how you may change potentially based on knowing that there are other ways to look at it. And what are the advantages? And you can change. You don't have to always wear one particular jacket. You just use, if you're a real person that's into practicality, use whichever one's best for particular circumstances. I think that'll make you a good psychologist. So Again, a couple more quick assumptions, and then the rest is history, as they say. So taxonomy is polythetic. So categories are not necessarily based on one or a few members. Instead, categories come together based on overall similarity or family resemblance. So you'll see a couple of these questions are very similar. It's much like the MMPI, if you've taken that before. Assumption 5, categories are abductively or reflectively derived. So you've got to check it out and see where you're going to put them. And abduction essentially is you read them all and then you sort them, as opposed to deduction where you sort them in order without being able to go back and erase and that kind of thing. And then you got to select the Q items. So the Q items samples are derived from the overall concourse or the hypothetical. So again, the universe of things. Think about that in terms of Q methodology. In terms of G theory, generalizability theory. Sources, written material on a topic. You can do interviews, etc., to get your sample together. So the investigator can rely on a single participant or on multiple participants as a source of Q items. Okay? You can do record an interview on a topic, on a focal topic, so something like appearance, which is open-ended and often non-directive. You can extract Q items. Statements are recorded and sorted by identifying natural meaning units and MUs. A number of Q items. There are no fixed number. Minimum is basically 24 to help you do the analysis, and then to approximately 60 to sort. Structuring of the Q sample. So unstructured, there is no categories. You can structure it by forcing categories by basically you specify a number that has to go in the category. You did that for you guys, or that was on your exercise. You had to put 2 in the edges, kind of making the normal curve essentially out of there. So things that were kind of in the middle of the road for you, I think you could put like 6 or 7 items there. And you want to try to make it consistent with phenomenological bracketing. So you try to, again, investigate the phenomena you're trying to study and see basically how many categories the content looks like to you from a face value or face content validity, face validity standpoint. Then you administer the Q sort, basic procedure unit. So 54 items are on your example on page 4. Force normal distribution. So number per pile, 3, 4, 5, 5, 6, 8. You can see that on the bottom there. And then most like to least like. So there's 11 piles in that normal distribution. Multiple people collect sorts across people to determine similarities among groups. So that's what we did. You could do a single person across times. So same person does multiple sorts under varying conditions. So you can look at anxiety, for example, under a condition where they're relaxed, and then you can also have them do the sort when they're anxious. So, like let's say symptoms. So symptoms are whatever, and then you can also have them sort things about their environment, and they can identify maybe things that are cool about their calm environment that they could try to bring into their anxious environment, etc. In this case, factors will indicate conditions of instruction that bear family resemblance to one another on the basis of subjectively shared attributes. So that's basically into individual subject utility. Clinical type baseline. This is how I currently feel about myself. Conditions of instruction guided by which facets of the questions we think would be informative. Theory-based hypotheses, personal bias, and subject bias. Data analysis interpretation. So you do a factor analysis. Factor analysis is a family of quantitative procedures that removes redundancy from a collection of correlations and represents the variables with a smaller set of derived variables or factors. Let me say that again. Factor analysis is a family of quantitative procedures that removes redundancy from a collection of correlations. That's that intercorrelation matrix. And represents the variables with a smaller set of derived variables or factors. So it gives you loadings. Kind of how you force the distribution, you're going to kind of force your factors. Okay, the number of factors is of course indeterminate. However, a good rule of thumb is to cease extracting factors upon obtaining a factor that accounts for less variance than a single sort. Goal: to achieve distinct phenomenological categories. Therefore, it's usually best to attain what is called simple structure of factors. Items within a factor are highly correlated. Individual factors are uncorrelated with one another. So as long as they don't correlate with each other, factor 1 and factor 2, and items within that are highly correlated, so all the items hang tight in that factor, then it's a good one to keep. And just keep keeping them until you don't have one that does that. and there are some guidelines for throwing them out or not. So factor loading or saturation. So the loading of a variable or a sort on a factor represents the correlation between the variable sort and the derived factor. If some members of a set of Q sorts have high factor loadings on factor A and low factor loadings on factor B, then the members of this set fall into a category defined by factor A, and they do not fit into the category defined by factor B. This commonality among factors is assumed to pertain to what we often refer to as a meaning, or a subjectivity. Ideal, far less factor than sorts. So you want to have way less factors than you have of items to sort for one, but however many times you enter it into it to make your matrix, essentially. The initial extraction method, principal components, is a type of factor analysis. And factor rotation. This is a way to redistribute the variance in the correlation matrix such that we obtain a clearer definition of the factors. Factor rotations are akin to altering our perspective or point of view. So that's also a technique. That's a statistical one where you can do an orthogonal, and we'll talk a little bit about that. I'll briefly touch on it in the factor analysis video. Okay, thank you.